Welcome to Greenlit, the Buffalo 8 podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Halderman, and each week we're going to dive into a different piece of content, film and television, and we're going to talk with some of the biggest names in front of and behind the camera as we dive deep into how they were financed, produced, developed, marketed, and the crazy stories behind how many of them got made. Welcome back to Greenlit, the Buffalo 8 podcast. Today I had a chance to sit down and chat with Mike Paseornek. Mike was the president of film production at Lionsgate from 1997 all the way through 2019. Mike oversaw films like American Psycho, Hunger Games, La La Land, Crash, an incredible executive who really did an amazing job during his career of walking both sides of the line, business and creative. Mike is one of the most well-respected studio executives we've ever dealt with, and at Bondit, I think we've probably done more than a dozen projects with Lionsgate over his tenure. So this is a wide-ranging discussion of Mike talking about everything from getting into the studio system and building what was a very scrappy entrepreneurial venture of piecing together what became Lionsgate and ultimately a studio, as well as talking through projects like the Hunger Games, as well as La La Land and American Psycho. Mike is a super grounded, down-to-earth guy who after 30 plus years, 40 plus years in this business, still seems as curious and as energized as ever. And I think you'll all enjoy this discussion. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Mike Paseornek. So today I've got Mike Paseornek joining us. And Mike, thank you for taking the time.
My pleasure.
Well, it's great to connect. And I know you're traveling back east during the crazy quarantine time. So it was actually well-timed for us to get to sit down and chat a little bit.
Well, I know now what it's like to be in a minimum security prison because I'm quarantining in a hotel and I get to leave the room and walk around a little and come outside, and then I have to go back to the room to eat. And so I'm ready to commit white-collar crime.
That's perfect. That's a perfect framing tool for this podcast about getting content greenlit. Well, you've had an incredible background, an incredible story, and we'll touch on a lot of it today. But I think to start us off, let's talk about a project that most people in the world are very familiar with, which is Hunger Games, and how Hunger Games got greenlit, and your role in that, Mike, because obviously you have a very big title and were certainly a very important person in that story.
Well, the interesting thing about the greenlight process in general is there are individuals who can greenlight something on their own. Like if John Feldheimer, our CEO, wanted to greenlight something, he could do it. Joe Drake, who's our chairman of film, now has greenlight authority and did then as well, and he could do it. But the way that most things are greenlit is they're greenlit so they don't become self-fulfilling prophecies if there's a lot of opposition to a movie. So everybody works really hard in a greenlight process to present the case for greenlight. And typically, and at that point, Hunger Games, although it was considered a pretty big book, it did have its controversy about, kids killing kids, and there was that voice out there. But at the same time, it was a book that had such a huge message that schools were, kids were reading it in schools. So that controversy was just a little bit on the fringes. Sure. But you'd hear that every now and then. But really, it was a powerful statement, that book. So it came in because Nina Jacobson had bought the book. It came into Ali Schirmer and to Jim Miller, who is the executive who oversees the creative on that now for the next installment coming up. And then what happened was we had to budget it. I was overseeing, the part of my job was also to oversee all physical production. And the one thing that Joe Drake and John Feldheimer said to me was, we want to make sure we're not making this film just the way a studio would and throw money at it. Because even though we were, climbing up the ladder and consider ourselves a studio, we didn't do things like a typical studio. So we really put a lot of effort into making sure we were exploring the best, most efficient way to get that film produced. But it was not a hard one to convince the Greenlight Committee, which was really, at that point, the Greenlight Committee was made up of, I was the president of motion picture production, Ali Shermer was another president, Joe Drake was chairman of the film group, Tim Palin was the marketing chief at the time. We also had our head of distribution, and people would get together, and our head of home entertainment, Ron Schwartz, and you'd get together and they would talk it out, and they would run numbers. And it's as much of an art and greenlighting a film as it is an exercise, which has real disciplines to it. And then at the end of the day, it takes one person, whether that be, now it would be Joe, then it would be Feldheimer, making that final call. They typically know when production presents something in a green light that they want to do it. So it's almost like production's vote almost doesn't count. Production's job in a green light process at a studio is to really get the passion behind it, position it, explain or overcome any obstacles that are presented as to what would it take to get this greenlit, what kind of names, how would you do that? And does the budget, can the budget come down? Is it too high? Is it not high enough to do? When we were doing La La Land, when Damien Chazelle and the team first came in, they wanted to do that film for a lot less money. And I remember the first meeting, I said to them, how are you going to do the movie for that little money? It's a musical, and you're shooting in LA, and they thought they would call in favors. And in LA, there's very few favors to call in. People have rate cards for their homes, you know.
Right.
But really, you love that. And by the way, my guess is Damien would have figured it out. The guy he's incredible. And he had the whole movie in his head. But we thought it would be better to give them some more money to do it right. So sometimes you're not just looking at it and saying, what's the cheapest we can do this for? You're looking at it to what the right number is. So it was pretty easy to greenlight, my recollection that Hunger Games got greenlit. It was really more about the production of it and how we could do it in a way that was cost efficient. And we went down to North Carolina. That's where we shot the first one. And, you know, on a franchise, wherever you start is really important, because you're going to soar after that. Everyone's going to start getting paid more. You know, you're not getting any discounts from anyone when the first one opens at $150+ million on the opening weekend. And that became really part of, you know, the challenge for the first one was how to do it at a price. Suzanne, the author, was interesting. It was always great to know, and Nina was like the whisperer for Suzanne, Nina Jacobson, the producer. But you would always have the answer. You know, sometimes you're like, there could be a debate, but when you have the source to discuss, she was very close in the creation of that, worked very close with Ali Shermer and Jim Miller at Lionsgate. And she was very good working with Billy Ray, who wrote that draft, and then Gary Ross, the director, who came in and completely did his version of the script as well. But she was very collaborative, so the creative process went seamlessly. The first movie did not have, if you look at the first movie compared to the next movies, there's a lot more visual effects in all the other movies than there were in the first movie. The first movie was done for a very modest price, and the actors were all young and not getting much. And then, of course, the Above the Line starts to do that, and you hold on for the ride. But it was a very successful franchise. And really, by the time we shot the first one, the 3 books had been done. And the big discussion was whether to break the third book into 2 parts, you know, which we did because we're a studio. That's what you do. So,
that's great. That's great. No, it's incredible. And so up until that point, you guys had made some, like you said, you didn't think of yourselves as operators, like studio operators, even though you had made obviously you were a studio. You were by definition sort of this mini major and very much on the map. Was that the biggest picture up through that time when that picture opened, and by what kind of magnitude?
Oh, a gazillion fold. I mean, it was, we were very big into genre. People say, "Oh, you guys must have loved horror films." No, you could make them cheaply, and but we were also very big into art house. We had a lot of Oscar nominations and a lot of acclaim as a studio, because we could also do that. We actually had a real taste for that type of movie. We also had, up to then, we had things like, so we had the Saw franchise. We had Tyler Perry, 2 films a year that would do really well. We had some smaller action-y things like Crash, which were cool and innovative. We considered ourselves scrappy and innovative, so we had some cool kind of action-y things. We had genre stuff. We had art house stuff. We were eclectic. And that took us, I would say, to a place that it gave us an anchor. That it's so easy to build around an anchor. When every year you're trying to piece together your slate, scrambling around, and it's much harder. You could actually have a slate that almost everything is profitable, but not be as profitable as having a slate where 50% work and 50% don't, but the 50% that work kill, or one of the 50% kills. So it was really hard to do as much planning, but we always, I think, positioned ourselves as a company that wasn't afraid to take a risk. Like we had Crash. I mean, Crash was a huge thing for us. We had, there were movies that were very edgy, and we weren't afraid to do those either. We were trying to be where the other people weren't. And do interesting things.
Was it always Jennifer Lawrence from an early stage? How did that come about with her casting? We co-own a company, Roadside, and we had a film called Winter's Bone that she was in, and everyone thought she was a great actress, and you didn't want, it was an opportunity to go with someone who was a great actress. When Jennifer is on the stage, on the screen, you can't take your eyes off her. She's the center of attention. And this was a character that had to have depth. I mean, she was giving up her life for her sister. You couldn't just go with someone who could do action. And she learned how to do action. I mean, there was a lot of heavy training there. And she was a trooper. I mean, it was a really excited group of people that went off to war to make that movie. The interesting thing is, Gary was absolutely the right guy to do the first one. And I think had timing been different, once the locomotive is going and you got to churn out a film every year, you can't take time to take a breath. That's another reason why sequels and franchises become more expensive, because you have dates to hit. And you do what you have to hit those dates. You have international distributors who are like, I'm planning on this. Everybody's planning on it. So you just do what you have to do. We moved it for the rest of the series. We moved the core of the shoot to Georgia, because we would get the above the line benefit also. And then we would jump off of there. And there were a lot more tricky special effects that had to be done. And Francis Lawrence was a guy who knew so precisely as a director about special effects that he would actually tell me at the end of a day, oh, if we use all those shots, I just cost you $4 million. But in the edit room, we'll see if we need them, and I'll try not to. And if we don't, it could be your choice, the studio's choice, whether you want, to have those in the movie or not. But he always brought it in. We were always on budget with the movies. But we would do things like we would end up having to match the virtual world we were creating with the real world that we were shooting in. So there was you needed someone who was visual effects savvy to be that, and he's also a great story guy. And Gary just, Gary did the first one.
he was not looking to rush in and just jam in another one. I think that happens a lot with directors who do the first one in a series. They're not always looking to, they kind of get that out of their system. And maybe if they had more time to think about it or to do it. But it was very amicable with Gary. It wasn't like he was asked if he wanted to just step in and do the next one, if I recall. And then he wanted to take a little time, and the ship was moving. And then Francis came in, and he was amazing.
And so you mentioned, and I know I've seen some press on it, that the franchise is going to continue. They're going to expand the world a little bit. Anything you can sort of comment on with that and that development?
I've been out of I left the company to do my producing thing. I'm still at Lionsgate and on the lot, but I'm not involved with the meetings, and I haven't kind of dipped my toe into that. So
got it.
They got it under control. Jim Miller, who was the creative executive on the movies, is going to continue on with that. And it's interesting that Joe Drake, when he was in the studio the first time as chairman of the film group, that was the last movie he did at the studio, and now he's back again and picked up the franchise. So it's nice. And Nathan Kahane and Aaron Westerman will be leading the charge now in the in the creative side of the business. So
that's great.
Yeah.
Well, Mike, you talk about using the word scrappy and looking in the direction other people weren't looking and being pretty eclectic. You were at Lionsgate, if I'm not mistaken, from basically day one.
Yes.
And oversaw the growth of that business through many phases of its evolution, from scrappy upstart to being a full-fledged studio to obviously, owning stars and John Malone and sort of becoming this bigger piece of the media fabric. Obviously, I think that's what a lot of people, especially as they build media companies today and sort of this startup culture, even speaking from my own perspective, Lionsgate's always been sort of this, what I want to be when I grow up for scrappy companies. What was it like just going through that ride? Even the content obviously being one thing, but the ride of building that business in what we all know is a crazy fragmented industry that was always reinventing itself had to be a hell of a story in and of itself.
Well, it was like working without a net constantly. And look, I can take credit for, thinking outside the box a lot and doing things in a, not reckless, but in a kind of a free-form way. I just, for me, it's always been understanding what I do well and what I don't. Thank goodness that John Feldheimer and Michael Burns came in because they knew how to grow a business as a business. Like Felt is he's a real visionary as a businessman, and Michael just knows how to put investors together and take chances and do all that. I couldn't have done that. Maybe had Jeff Sackman stayed, he could have been more of that, because Jeff with me was always, when we started working together, he would just be the guy who would take care of us with all that stuff. So I got used to that. But still, I would say what I really learned quickly was no one thanks you for just doing things by the book. No one thanks you for getting things done on budget. No one thanks you for being a good little boy or girl. They thank you for results. And Hollywood rewards success, not good behavior. If you're lucky, you get both. And I feel like I was very well behaved. I was brought up right. But at the same time, I would do things first and ask questions later. Once given, we were very entrepreneurial. And, when we, for example, I was standing in a parking lot in Hollywood waiting for my car with my wife, and there was a long line of older African-American women standing in front of me. And I said to the woman in front of me, I could see it was going to take me an hour to get my car. What's going on tonight? And she said there was a guy named Tyler Perry who plays Medea. And and I didn't even realize, but it taught me a real lesson, because Charles King, Tyler got Charles as an agent. Charles kept sending me tapes of his plays, and I just wasn't resonating. I wasn't even looking at them. And then I thought, oh, there's some plays on my desk. And then I read them, and then I got a meeting with Tyler. I went backstage after a show, and I said, let's turn this into a movie. I didn't have approval. I didn't have money. I didn't have anything. I said I could see the audience's reaction to him. And that was the first, that was Diary of a Mad Black Woman. And then, 19 movies later, and we also did a lot of TV work with Tyler. And Tyler is an industry I could never dream of being. Like, he just figured it out in a big way. And he never followed the rules. Tyler used to say to me, if I suggested something that was too much of a fit for Hollywood, he'd say, if I thought like that, I'd never get anywhere. I gotta do it my way. And I stopped making dumb suggestions to Tyler. I just went along for the ride. And that was the gift Tyler gave me. And I think, the gift I gave him was go do your thing. And I had to convince Feldheimer that this was a good idea. And it's one thing for me to say, to take credit for that, but someone else has to agree, that we're going to spend all this money. Because what happened was, when the first movie, when Diary, before it came out, Tyler started, it got known around town that all of a sudden, here's a movie testing at 99. And when we tested the movie, it wasn't like a one-to-one recruit. It was worse than a one-to-one recruit. We had lines around the block. People had heard that Tyler had a movie, and they just showed up and mobbed the theater. And Tyler had to go out and say, there'll be more movies. We're going to all get to see this. And so that buzz got around Hollywood a little bit. And there was competition for the next one. So I went into John Feldheimer's office, and I said, Feld, we're going to have to now before the first one comes out, we not only have to greenlight the next one, we have to commit DNA to it too. So the first one hasn't come out yet. And by the end of the day, we bought the rights to distribute all his plays on video from the plays, the rights to do them as movies. We had such a huge commitment, and we didn't even know if it was going to work.
Right.
We thought it would. So for us, that was a big thing. And I don't know too many other studios that would have just done that, even though it wasn't such a huge expense if you have a parent company and your Warner Brothers. But it might not have been important enough to them to do that. And it was important enough to us to do that. And I never thought for a second, when I said to Tyler, let's do this movie, that I couldn't get it done, that I'd get shot down. Even though there's a green light process, even though it never occurred to me that I wasn't going to be able to do that movie. Sorry, my phone just went.
That's okay. That's all good.
Yeah.
No, that's great. That's an awesome story. And so Tyler's still with Lionsgate, right? I mean, Lionsgate had always been his home.
And Tyler left us for the greener pastures of television in a big way. Like, he was doing TV with us, but he got a deal. He went over and Oprah gave him a bunch of slots on her channel. Then we were still doing movies. We still do the Medea movies with him.
Yep.
And then Viacom made him a huge deal. And part of it was that they got first look at his films also. So Tyler, but I still talk to him regularly. I still have the opportunity to do films with him. When he decides to bring Medea out of retirement, we'll do it with him. Right now, he hates putting on the dress. Tyler is, I don't know if you know about his studio in Atlanta, but it's unbelievable. And I have been lucky enough with Tyler that when he built his first studio, I put on the construction boots and the hard hat and walked around the campus of it and said, who's going to be the contractor of this? It was an old campus of Delta Airline. And he said, I am. and he built that. And then, and this one, he drove me all around when it was still the fort and showed me the model that he was going to do it. And it was 300 and whatever acres. And I thought, I know you're the contractor, and sure enough, like, he had his own in-house guys do it. The man is a force of nature. I don't think people understand, unless you spend time with him. You don't understand just how he drives things home, how he gets things done, how he thinks outside of the way anybody else thinks. I've been really lucky to have a front row seat in that.
Would you say, Mike, that kind of persistence and the tenacity and the, in many ways, the never sort of giving up stubbornness is a constant that you've seen in a lot of great creators over your career?
Yeah, I think anytime I've had a director or a creator give in to something I say quickly, I go, oh, this is not a good thing. You want creators to fight for their vision. Think about it. A director is usually the least experienced person on a set. So you're hiring them not because they've done 75 films like the gaffer or even the DP. You're hiring them for a vision. So you want them to fight for their vision. Now, at a certain point, you know, like, it's enough. Okay, that vision costs $20 more million. By the way, you're already over. Well, I get it. Come up with a different vision. But you really don't want them just to give in to you. And oftentimes, someone will say to me, would you ever work with that guy again? I hear he's difficult. I'm like, yeah, he made a great film. Like, why not? Of course I would. But when directors just start rolling over, it's usually not a good thing. You know, the great ones don't do that, male or female. They are both stubborn. They have a vision. They can still be kind, but they are focused. And I do think that kind of persistence and the attention to detail. You know, the thing in our business, which I always tell people who are young and starting out, I never want to hear how, when you ask someone, what did you think of that? Oh, it was okay. That's not an answer. An answer is, why was it only okay? And I want details, and I want vision is everything. That's all we have, because, you know, the desks aren't worth anything. You know, there's not much that's worth anything in the film business, and it's all changeable. It's all changeable. The business is set up when you're on the studio side so that your footprints get washed away like you're standing in the sand at the beach when you go. Because if they didn't, people would panic and say, oh, so-and-so left. How are we going to continue? That person was too important. So it's set up so while you're there, if you want to move, you have to make a difference. And you have to be as persistent and dedicated, and the best movies get done when someone on the ground floor, you know, some young person says, this is important to me. This is a great movie and demands attention. People pay attention in the film business to passion. You know, it's hard to deny it, because no is most of what you get, you know, what people say. So you're not helping a studio as an employee if all you do is keep sending stuff in to get it set up. Right. You have to be able to fight for it, stand for it. So whether it be the great filmmakers or the great studio executives, they have to duke it out, and really be prepared to express their opinion and fight for it. And that's the same with filmmakers.
Transitioning a little bit to another film, I mean, you've been involved in, like you've said, and you know, hundreds of movies. Some of them are incredibly, incredibly noteworthy, and there's too many to go through in a 45-minute, hour-long discussion today. But American Psycho, definitely a groundbreaking movie. I have to imagine a groundbreaking time for Lionsgate. I was a teenager, maybe a little bit even younger, when that movie was coming out, and it was such a big deal for so many reasons. What was that process like? Doesn't have to be as in-depth, Mike, as the overview of Hunger Games, or you can if you'd like. But that film definitely felt like one of those scrappy, looking where other people weren't looking movies.
Yeah, there weren't that many studios that were, I mean, Ed, if I recall, bought the book in like 92, Ed Pressman. And it wasn't really until he came to us, I think, in 97, we finished our deal with him. And the only reason I know that, and I'm acting really like I know that, is because I wrote it down. I just glanced over there, because I'm terrible with dates, so I actually wrote that down. But we had a unique deal with Ed, which, again, I don't know that a lot of studios would have done a deal like this. We wanted to make that happen, and Ed was worried about this thing getting tied up in development forever. And now that he brought Mary into the process, Mary Harron, we wanted to make sure we're moving forward. So every 30 days, we had to do something. Both of us had to agree. Every 30 days, make an offer to someone, just something had to happen. There had to be some activity, or we lost the option. And it was, you know, Jeff Sackman and I had no issue doing a deal like that, because we had every intention on making the movie. To us, this was a very important movie and really kind of symbolized the kind of studio that we wanted to be. And there was I don't know if Jeff will even remember this, but he might, because it was we had a little mini corporate retreat, and it was me, Joe Drake, who at the time was our head of international sales, and Jeff. And we were playing touch football, and I kind of ripped my hamstring, and they were laughing so hard at me that, I'm sure I gave them the pleasure for the next month, how funny they thought that was. But at that time, that's the reference, if you ever ask Jeff this question. At that time, Titanic had come out and been this enormous, event in the world, and Leo was the biggest star in the world. And we were sitting there and saying, let's make an offer to Leonardo DiCaprio of $20 million. So it just as a coincidence, I had a meeting at Industry Entertainment where both Rick Yorn and his sister-in-law, Julie Yorn, were working, and Rick was Leo's guy, and Julie was Steve Buscemi's guy. I went in for a meeting with Steve, who I always loved and wanted to do a little film with, and Steve Buscemi was actually the first person on the lot at Lionsgate in New York. He had a little desk, and we would give him lunch, and he was writing a script. He didn't get paid anything. He would come in and use our loft there, and so I told him he's the first person ever on the lot at Lionsgate. But so I was having a discussion with Julie, and at the end I said, you know what? I want to go and see Rick, and we're going to offer Leo $20 million. I think it was actually $21 million because we wanted it to be more. And we wrote it on a piece of paper, and I left the script, and Rick's like, put it on the top of the pile. So I left it there. We got a good laugh about it, but we were serious, but we got a good. And Rick calls me like the next week and says, you're not going to believe this, but Leo came in for a meeting, and he sat and he read the script, and it's one of his favorite books, and he wants to get involved with this. Oh my God. So then all hell broke loose, and Mary wanted Christian at that point. And we, look, in fairness to every side of this thing, we were a small growing company. We had never said to Mary, you can make the movie at that point with Christian. We were definitely leaning into that, and I had met with Christian. I thought he was amazing. But boy, to get Leo, I mean, what started happening was Joe Drake started getting offers of huge amounts from international. I got a call from every major studio saying, we'll pay you this, we'll take it over. It was game-changing all around. So we explored it. Of course, Mary, having all the integrity in the world, basically said to me, I'm out. So, wow. I couldn't believe I said, just meet with him. And she said, Christian, I have been working on this, I'm out. And I said to Mary, we have to explore this and see where this leads us. And we did explore it, and Leo met with a lot of big directors. He met with, from Scorsese to Oliver Stone, and Scorsese and him obviously did a lot of great work after that. But Oliver came forward and said, I really want to do this. And at the end of the day, it was all over pretty quickly because Leo decided he wanted to do Danny Boyle's The Beach before he did American Psycho. So because he felt more comfortable tackling that first, and he thought it would take him a lot more prep for American Psycho. And so I called Mary up. I mean, I've read all kinds of things, how we offered it to Ewan McGregor next, and we offered it to Ed Norton, and we offered it. I can tell you from my perspective, and I think pretty sure I was the only one on point on that. I mean, yes, every day Joe and Jeff and I talked, but I called Mary up and I said, would you take your old job back as the director if we go with Christian Bale? And she said, absolutely. And the exploration was over. And that was the whole thing. We never sold the territory based on it. We never did anything based on it. So it all got overblown because we were exploring it. And I know I'm probably, when someone puts years of work and thought into something, and Mary wrote a great script with Genevieve Turner after she came aboard. I mean, it was just so good. I mean, development on that film was that. They did it. You know, I can't take any credit for. Yes, we gave notes because that's what we do, but we didn't, you know, do that thing of pissing in it to make it better. We really let the filmmaker. That was a film about vision. And then Christian, you know, he never said a bad word to me about it. He was always great and a total professional. It was like it never happened. It was, you know, like in that old episode of Dallas where he wakes up and whoever's in the shower and they continue the series. That's what it was like. It was a big deal. And then Cerruti came aboard and took out patterns of the suits from that time and remade the suits. And it just started to snowball. Koch came aboard to do this track and put up a lot of money to buy all those songs, you know, so we could have them in the movie, except for Greatest Love of All, which the record company didn't want Whitney Houston associated with a drug thing, which now the irony of that, even
of course.
So we used the musical version. We couldn't use Whitney's. That's why there's a symphony. It worked out great because, you know, when you're killing and there's like a symphony, it's great. But that's why we tried to get Whitney's version of it, but we were turned down based on that.
I love it. How was the opening of that movie, Mike, when it was done, when it finally came out?
You know, here's the thing about it. If you would have walked around New York City like I did and go into the theaters that it was in, you would have thought it was the biggest movie of all time. It worked. I mean, the company made a lot of money on it. We made it for $8 million. We didn't spend much P&A on it. You know, it did like $15 million at the box office. Where it worked in the big cities, it was massive. We couldn't get, it's not like today where if a film is working and other films aren't, they flip a switch and now it's in more theaters, it's got more playtime. Back then, we had to send prints. So, you know, we were getting requests for prints all week long. I mean, we couldn't even capitalize the same way on the excitement in the cities. But in the suburbs, I heard people were walking out. They thought it was going to be a horror film, and instead it was this satire. You know, there was, and I'm not diminishing people who live in the suburbs, but the young kids in the suburbs went. It wasn't the parents. It was, you know, the mall theaters were kids thinking they were going to see a horror film.
Right.
And so it didn't work as well there, but the ancillaries went through the roof. Everything about that movie was profitable for the company. And
I have to imagine the home video was incredible for that film.
The home video is incredible, and it was the gift that kept giving. There is nothing about that movie that was not well thought out. That from the marketing and to the approach that Mary and her team had to making the movie, it was great. The one thing I'll say about the making of the movie, though, was the book was so controversial, as you might remember. It almost didn't come out because of it. So I was trying to shoot the whole film in New York because I thought it's a New York film. But most of the places that you would need to use offices and things like that were conservative institutions. So you couldn't, every time they would realize what it was, the location manager would say, we got turned down again, we got turned down again. So kind of closed down the New York office, production office, and said, well, we're going to have to build sets in Toronto. So we did, and then we shot exteriors in New York. We shot a whole bunch of exteriors in New York. But we had to leave. We got run out of town, basically. And to build the sets in New York back then for us would have been way too expensive. I remember there was one review I read, and I can't remember where it was, but it mentioned the striking skyline shots out of Christian Bale's home, out of his apartment, and I thought the Translite company should pin that review up on their wall, because that was a Translite. That wasn't a real skyline shot.
Love it.
Yeah. I mean, so the sets were really well done. Everything about it was, and Christian worked out. He was like a crazy man, and he would get up in the morning and never leave character, and never leave that voice that he puts on, you know, during the day. It was quite that was quite an experience. That movie was a real run. I'll say this about when you do movies that have a festival run, everyone becomes like a family. You know, when you do a big film, unless it's a sequel, like when we were doing John Wick or Hunger Games, everybody was like a family because you've been together for 5 years. But when you're, for the most part, when you have a big commercial film, the film comes out, there's a premiere, there's a press junket, there's whatever, and it's over. When you're on a ride of a film that gets a festival run, you're sitting at little places together, you're at tables, you're at dinners, you're doing the whole run, you know, the whole festival run, and you really get to know people, and it becomes like a real family event for everybody involved. And this was one of those. You know, really felt it.
No, it's awesome. It's awesome. Well, I've got 2 more questions. I know we're almost up on time here. I think the first one is, you know, now you've transitioned, like you've said, to a producing deal with Lionsgate. What was the motivating factor or factors of that, and what does that look like? And is that at all in a sort of illustrative, you know, sort of change in the business and how you thought about, you know, your next chapter?
Well, I have this thing that I always say to myself, and it feels like every 5 years, where do I fit in the industry right now? Because you can either go forward or fall back. It's really hard to stay where you are. Everything changes around you. So I constantly think about, I see the new players in a company, and where would I fit now? I never grabbed for everything. I always thought, here's where I'm most effective right now. I'll support this project rather than be the guy. I'll do, you know, I always tried to figure out that role. And the industry has changed a lot, but the thing I actually understand from being in it so long is you get to a certain age and you have to figure out how to stay relevant. And Lionsgate has always been a very generous place for me. No one would ever say to me, why don't you do this instead of this? Like, I've always felt really lucky and supported at Lionsgate. And I can't think of too many other places where everybody's got their thing, but deep down, everyone has a heart. And then you do what you have to, and you try to be as kind as you can about it. That's been kind of the thing. So we got to this place, and I felt like there are a lot of young people now who should really, you know, show what they've got. And it's time for people, you know, there's a tendency when you get to a certain age, people to work around you. Oh, we don't want to upset Mike, or that's usually his thing, or whatever. And I've tried never to be at that place, never.
Right.
But I didn't want to get to that place. So I thought there are things I'd like to focus on. There are projects I want to focus on. There's more in life. I'm doing foundation work. I have projects I'm attached to. There's more to life than grinding it out in the studio, being on the road all the time. And when you're in it, you're in it. It's not a part-time job. I know it's not brain surgery, as they say. I know we're not finding cures for anything, but it's a ticking clock always. And you're always looking at the next few years. You're never in the moment. You're in the moment solving problems. You're in the next few years looking what the next problems are, what the slate is going to be, what do we have to achieve? Uh-oh, we're behind on this. What is that going to do here? The international guys want that. It's constant. It's a constant process. So I really felt it was time to focus on a few things to make some room for people so that they could, who have a touchy-feely thing with the zeitgeist. You know, when I was young, I used to look at older people in the industry and I thought, oh, they're really good for guidance and all that. Oh, but they don't know who that is really. They're not really fans of that. They're not, that's some place I never wanted to be. So I always listened really hard to who was interesting, who was good, why people liked. Getting on wavelengths to me is the key to our business. Getting on a director's wavelength, a producer's wavelength, a young person who's working for you wavelength, and understanding what do they like about something. Why is that important? Because otherwise you're just giving your opinion. You're not giving an opinion that adds to anything that's going on. So it was time. And there's projects. Diversity has always been very important to me at the studio, from both front and behind the camera, giving opportunities. So I have a couple of projects that I'm attached to. The Angela Davis story. There's a book, The Coldest Winter Ever. There's I'm still involved with the Eugenio Derbez business. He's the biggest star in the Latinx community. I'm doing another film with him and Ben Odell, who've grown their business. There's so many opportunities out there. I'm going to still be involved with the next John Wick, which a franchise I absolutely love. Something created from nothing by these guys. I mean, it wasn't a comic book. It wasn't. I was shocked to find out it wasn't a comic book.
Yeah.
I just figured it was based on something when I first read it. So I'm getting to do things that I'm excited about doing, and I still get to be around the studio and work with people on the businesses as they want it. When I left Lionsgate, the one thing I said was, I don't want to be attached to anything. You tell me what you want me to be attached to. And this way, no one ever could waste their energy saying, how do we unattach this guy from this? Right. So I think after doing this for so many years, I just have watched how people transition in the business. And it's important to constantly ask yourself, where could I do my best work right now? Where can I make a difference? And not do anything but that as part of your job.
It's awesome. It's awesome. No, I usually end with the same question, which is, knowing what you know now about the process, but also knowing what you know now looking back, what advice or piece of advice or guidance would you have given yourself at that younger age of getting started and making content? But I think you've touched on a lot of it. I'm curious if there's anything else you haven't, but you've really, you're incredibly pragmatic and grounded, and I know you've probably dealt with a lot of crazy people. We've certainly dealt with a lot of crazy people in this business, but it's that rooted, you use the phrase, I was brought up right. And I understand and appreciate that. But I also think your comment about this business rewards success first and good behavior a very, very distant second, if at all. But you have this incredible groundedness and still real energy and passion for the business. Is there anything else that you sort of look back and say, here's the sort of footnote I would have wanted to have read going into this long ride?
If there's anything, every now and then I've had an opportunity to pay attention to something and learn something, and I was too busy maybe to do it and thought, I'll put that aside and learn about it later. We often get exposed to things. We never know if we're going to get exposed to them again, whether it be something new technologically, whether it be a talent who we're getting to work with, who we get to spend time with. And I think if I had one thing I would want to do, and I think I paid very close attention, but I wouldn't say, I'll learn more about that later. I would do it at the moment, because there's experiences you sometimes never get to duplicate in this business, and experience is one of them. And you only get to experience something for the first time once, and it's magical the first time, and then after that, it's like, I get it. I've seen this. I've seen. You've got to kind of put together pieces always from something you learn from here with something you learn from there, but. There's something really exciting about experiencing something for the first time. And after that, it's not as interesting to do it again. So I think there were times when I let moments go. And I'm not even talking about learning moments. I mean, moments of joy that I could have had in the business, but I was too busy doing something else, and I didn't take the moment to celebrate it or to really appreciate it because I was too obsessed with something else. But I think I kind of have lived my career the way I wanted to. Yeah. And if I had to say one thing, is you can't be successful with any fear about your actions. You have to really feel conviction for what you're doing. Have perspective about where it fits in the scheme of the goals,
Yep.
So you're not just doing wacky things, but then have no fear when you make a decision, go for it and own it.
Right.
And people respect that. People want to hear conviction, and they want a voice, and they want to be able to ask you a question because they know they'll get an answer that they can use when they're talking to someone else about it. So, and I've always felt that way about everything. So, but yeah, there's always a left and a right turn. Oh, I could have done this instead of doing that.
No, it's
I'll
awesome.
tell you, there's one other thing I'll say, and then, which is I got a very humbling thing happen to me when I was a young guy in the business. I was working a lot, and you can do a lot of stuff where nothing happens with it. And I was doing rewrites, and my first, I was, when I first got out of school, I approached Michel Choquette was the editor at the National Lampoon, and I showed him my stuff, and I became his writing partner. And then I went out to LA, and I was writing a bunch of stuff, and I was making money. And there was an agent, a young woman who wanted to sign me, and I went with like a big agency instead. And then she went, when CAA was formed, it became a big agent there. And I called her up, because then for about a year, my career was going nowhere. And I called her up, and she said, Mike, let me tell you something. Right now, I'm hot and you're not. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me in my career, because I was like, you know what, that's true. She is and I'm not. And when I had my 15 minutes and she wasn't, she really made an appeal to me that she cared about me, and I just blew it off. So you can't cry over spilled milk in this business. You have to, that's the other thing is don't point fingers. Don't, if only I did this or only, we're all going to have a million of those stories through our careers.
I love it. Well, Mike, I really appreciate you taking the time. It's awesome. It's a great stories, and enjoy the white collar prison for a little bit longer.
Thank you. And I realized that I couldn't have picked a worse place to have this interview. As white as my hair is, it's now become the same color as my face. So hopefully
it's all good.
Somewhere.
It's all good. We'll do as much as we can in post.
All right. I appreciate that. Save me in post.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Take care, man.
It was fun. Bye-bye.
Thank you all for listening to another episode of Greenlit, the Buffalo 8 podcast. For financing questions, feel free to contact us at Bondit Media Capital at info@bondit.us. For production, development, and distribution questions, feel free to contact us at Buffalo 8, info@buffalo8.com. We'd love to hear from you and hope you'll continue listening to the podcast episodes ahead.